Welcome to Can We Have a Conversation? We have a special guest today, distinguished guest who has a book, has a documentary on fatherhood. It's Professor Khalid White. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
You know, we've been trying to get together and do this show for a while, and I know there's a lot of commonalities between you and myself as far as fatherhood.
Yes, indeed.
And I just wanted you to just real briefly kind of give us a little bio of who you are, and then I see you got some of your books and your documentary. Could you share a little bit of that with us?
Definitely. Well, I'm Khalid White, again, as you mentioned. Professionally, I'm an educator, and I'm also an author and a filmmaker, as you mentioned. With me, bio-wise, I grew up with both of my parents, and we were able to move from the neighborhood to a suburban city in Fremont, so that's where I grew up and that type of thing. But my parents ended up splitting up. And so I see, when I was young, probably around 11 or 12. So I saw kind of a change in the family dynamic. Now, fast forward to me becoming a father myself, I started to be able to look back on some of the things family-wise that led me down certain paths, that led me to not go down certain paths. And I saw the importance of having strong male role models in my life, particularly as a male, particularly strong black male role models. But I had some white ones as well. So I say all that to say that oftentimes we see the African-American male in some negative lights, but I was fortunate to be able to have some good, strong, positive role models, mentors who were black men that affected me positively. So I wanted to kind of encapsulate that in these works that I did.
Great.
Yeah.
So your parents split up when you were about 11, you said?
Yeah, 11, 12, somewhere in there. Where?
And
sixth
so,
grade-ish.
Did you live with your mother or your father?
Live with my mother.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what happened with the relationship between your father at that time?
Well, fortunately, he still was very active, very, involved, and still hands-on.
Okay. Okay.
Even though not physically in the house, but a lot of sacrifices I saw him make, and I can understand it now as an adult. At the time, didn't really understand it. At the time, it was a lot of kind of heartache and that type of thing when the split up happened, the breakup happened. But to my father's credit, and I guess just to be perfectly honest with you, it almost like he never really left. I knew he wasn't in the house physically, but he still was very active, remained very active, even in the midst of the things he was going through. So, I definitely tip my hat to him for that. And it really set a tone for me when I became a dad on the types of things I was supposed to do.
Right. So, it's amazing. When I was having this conversation before, we came in the studio with a couple people we had like a conference call, and we were talking about, unfortunately, when families separate and they go into divorce, society makes it seem as though the father has divorced the children when he's divorced the mother. And so sometimes fathers, because of their relationship with the ex, they have this separation from the kids because they don't want to be dealing with the ex. And then the kids suffer. So it sounds like that wasn't your situation.
Well, that wasn't my situation as far as that scenario is concerned. I didn't suffer in terms of a lack of missing him or that type of thing. Even though now I look back on it, my dad's schedule was super demanding, right? He's out of town a lot for work and things of that sort. And he and my mom never really got along. They kind of butt heads, for the most part. But he still made his presence felt, and I'm like a benefactor of that relationship now, and we still got a good relationship. We still hang out, spend time, the whole nine. And I still have both my parents. So, I'm fortunate in that regard. But the idea is that when the parents split up, or the misconception is that when the parents split up, the father also takes off. And I think that stereotypes get saddled on black men especially, In some cases, we know it's true, but in my case, I know that to not be true. So that's kind of why I want to go along and do this, do this work.
Yeah, that was leading into my next question. Was so what led you to this? Led you to this work was the fact that you had a father who was engaged in your life?
Yeah, that's part of it. I had a father, grandfathers, uncles, the whole nine. We came a lot of strong males in the family, and a lot of coaches and the pastors and that type of thing that kind of really put their arms around me, right? So that's part of the story. I want to celebrate them because I just, again, black men and black fathers especially get berated through the media most of the time. But really what it's two things that kind of made me want to go into it. One was some lyrics or some rap lyrics that kind of struck me, where this rapper named Common was, popular rapper and that type of thing. He made a reference to his daughter, and I have a daughter. And so when he said that about his daughter, I was like, well, somebody else feels the same way about their daughter that I feel about mine. Like, this little girl could change the world one day. So that kind of put the bug in my ear, kind of planted a seed, like, man, maybe I should start looking at the father-daughter dynamics. And then on top of that, I knew too many of my friends and too many people in my life that were black men that were really hands-on with their kids, regardless of the relationship with the mother. That's another part to the story. I want to, again, celebrate that. Thirdly, what really made me get up off my butt and get out there and start doing the work was when I saw in 2014 the death of Michael Brown out there in Ferguson, Missouri, and how through the media Michael Brown was looked at as some type of demon, some type of villain. But in addition to that, the media demonized his community in their response to his murder, and then they really demonized Michael Brown Sr., the father, and said, well, if he was around, Michael Brown wouldn't be in this situation. They was kind of alluding to that and saying that, but not saying it, and saying that Michael Brown Sr. caused the riots, took away all the responsibility from the officer that killed this young man, right? So I was just like, man, it was swimming in my mind to do something on black fathers, but when I saw that Michael Brown thing, almost the next day, I started calling up some of these guys like, hey man, I want to do a project on black fathers. Would you be interested? And everybody I called and reached out to, they said, yeah, I'm on board 100%. So it was a combination of things that led me to really want to do this, and I'm a doer,
right? Right.
So I was just like, that's it. That's confirmation. God put this in my lap,
right?
And so, yeah.
That's wonderful, because there's such a crisis with fatherhood, not only in America, but in the world. And your story, unfortunately, is not every young black kid or young man of color's story. I mean, so many young men wish that they had a dad, just present.
Sure.
And a lot of times, we practice what we're taught. In your case, you were taught, you had a foundation of what fatherhood was. Not saying that you always probably lived up to that, because we all, stray and go different directions. But you had a male role model, and you had male role models, is what I hear, that were a part of your life and kind of helped shape you into who you are. And even with your education and where you are in life today, is because I believe it's that structure, that foundation that's in your life.
Man, you hit the nail right on the head. The structure and the foundation was laid early. Now, in addition to my dad, again, my uncles and that type of thing, I had some coaches, and these were baseball coaches. Really, two guys that stick out of my mind, three guys that were stick out of my mind. My coaches were white guys who taught me the game of baseball, right? And it was discipline. It was practice at this time, practice on these mechanics. I don't care if you're black and we're white. I want you to be successful. And not only that, but these coaches also had their kids playing too. So it was like, we can kind of, we connected that way. I look back on it and say, man, that was some structure that was outside of the home. But in the home and with my dad, man, it was, turn the TV off, do your work. No TV until you read this or do that, and all this stuff that I try to emulate with my own daughter. That at the time I was like, man, why are we doing this on Saturday? Why I gotta go here? Why we gotta go there? But I see the benefit of it now. So yes, it did help me in terms of my structure and discipline and the push for, you know, going to school and going to college and doing all these different types of things was from some of the role models I had. And not all of them went to college.
Right.
But it was instilled in me like, you have two choices. You can go to college, you can go to the Army.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
I wasn't cut out for it.
Yeah.
I wasn't cut out for it.
Yeah, I went into the Marines.
Okay. And more power to those who go into the military.
Right.
We need that. I knew that wasn't the route that I wanted to take. So
Right.
let me try this college route.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that's great. And it sounds like you're from a background of educators. Is that correct? Or
Man, definitely. Yes, definitely. The education or the educator from on both sides. You know, the women in the family, Black college educators, or Black college educated, and then went into education themselves. So my grandmother, my mom, my aunts, you know, from PE teachers and math teachers and early childhood ed on one side, and then on my dad's side, his mom was the educator. So we come from this tradition of the Black colleges, you know, the historical Black colleges. You know, the family came from the South initially, and so that was the only option for us was the Black colleges. So I ended up going to a Black college, and you know, so yeah. Long story short, definitely the seed was planted to go into higher education, not necessarily to be an educator, but I have educators on both sides of the family, for sure.
And see, the thing is, and this is great why we can have this conversation for one, and two is why we even having this conversation is because a lot of these conversations that I have about fatherhood is not your story. And I want to show people that what happens when you do have a father that doesn't live in the house, who is a non-custodian parent, but is still present.
For sure.
Because that's not the norm. That's not, and for you that probably was the norm because that's what you had. But when other young men see what you have, they yearn for that because they've never had it. You know, my dad, he actually lived in the house, but he was present sometimes, and he showed me some things. But it would have been great to see him at one of my basketball games. You know, to root me on. I mean, he bought the newspapers, and he would brag. And he wouldn't brag to me, but he would tell other people, yeah, this is my son. You know, here's how many points he scored. But it would have been wonderful to be able to have him right there in the stands rooting me on. I would have played better. You know, I would have made some better decisions, you know, in life. This is something that I would love to, you know, talk about. Not only fathers being present, but also when we hear that term, it takes a village to raise. It's not just a term. You know, it takes a village to raise a child. That means the whole community is engaged. You know, like when we used to do things wrong, man, the neighbor would spank us, and then the neighbor would tell our parents, and then we'll get it again when they come home. But you know, if we had someone to, you know, if we needed to talk to someone, we wouldn't talk to our fathers, but we probably could talk to Mr. Jones or Mr. Dunn or Mr. Roberts. You know, it was other people that we had access to, you know, to talk about what we struggle with. Unfortunately, it's not always, you know, the story today.
It's not the case as much anymore, no. And I do agree that it takes a village. Your neighbors and or coaches are part of that village, right? They're producing you from a boy to a young man to where you are today, right? They help in that cultivation of you. So I do agree. We're still very much an African people, and that it takes a village to raise a child is an African proverb, right? It talks about interdependence. Part of our African self is still very much interdependent on the grandmother, on the mother, on the aunts, on the uncle, on the dad, on, you know, et cetera, on the church, on the pastor, the deacons, right? It's still that community. We still thrive on that when we have it.
Right.
It's just that there's been an attack on our community.
Right.
A deliberate attack. And so that fabric is not as strong as it may have once been because of all these different, you know, the war on this and the war on that and the war on this. It really becomes a war on the Black family or families.
Right.
And then, you know, by and large, it's directly aimed at breaking the fabric of the Black family. So In the works, we talk a little bit about that. You know, the war on drugs and how, you know, some men came back from Vietnam where we were really on the front lines 9 times out of 10, and you know, and that how that affects people when they come back home into society. So, you know, as an educator who teaches African American studies and sociology and that type of thing, right? And the person who kind of lived through really that war on drugs, you know, it affected my family hands on. So we see these things are statistics, yes, but in all actuality, these things really affected us as Black people, and not just Black people in the Bay Area. That's across the nation and then internationally as well, as you're finding out through doing the work that you're doing, right? So, back to the point is that, the village is still very essential and very necessary for our survival. And even when we're no longer children, we still need that village.
Right.
So that is why, you know, the importance of the male role model, not only just a dad, but the model that you can see somebody positive, doing something positive, whether it's mentor-mentee type of relationship, whether it's, you know, again, a coach. You know, a lot of people talk about their football coach or the basketball coach, or, you know, even some of these athletes who we can pattern ourselves after, right? That's kind of the new role model. Part of the village. We still need that.
You know, I played on multiple levels of basketball, and I had a high school coach that came when I was a junior, and my parents separated when I was a senior. And I wish that he would have been able to see the change in me. He saw the change, but he didn't really dig deep to find out
what was going on.
Because there was a drastic change from my junior year to my senior year. I mean, the way I played, my behavior,
body language,
all of that. And I would have hoped that he would have pulled me to the side and said, because I was crying out. I was actually literally crying out, saying I need help. And the folks that was helping me was the folks that knew I could play, and they was the bad characters. And so they would give me gifts and stuff on the street in front of the high school, you know, just would shake my hand and give me a package, you know, and I'm like, you know, what is this, you know? And so, yeah, man, I saw you play, man, you did a good game. And so that was their way of rewarding me. But I needed a person that was there with me every day, which was a coach, because I had to practice every day. I said, man, I'm seeing some things that's happening in your life, man. You know, and it's a shift, and I don't know what, you know, it's a negative shift, and I just want to know what's going on. You
absolutely.
So, because he had my attention.
The coach got your attention in the palm of their hand.
Right.
Regardless of what level we're talking about, particularly the higher level you go up.
Right.
The coach holds, you know, kind of all your hopes and dreams in their palm of their hand. It would have been great for that.
Yeah, I remember. I remember one day he told me, and I've never said this before, but he's like, you gotta be careful what you smoke before a game. That's what he told me. You know, and I'm like, huh? You know, and so that would have been a conversation to have off, you know. Hey, I'd like to talk to you.
Yeah,
you know, what's going on? Are you getting high? Or, you know, what's happening? Because I'm noticing, you know, the way you play is different. You know, I've noticed that the way you responded to other players is kind of aggressive. You know, these are conversations that I would have loved to have that could have kind of helped shape me and bring me back.
Yeah.
But he actually went the other way in disciplining me, in which he rather than me drawing to him, I drew away from him.
So as a coach, as a counselor, as an educator, as a mentor, it puts those of us in those positions. Are we interested in the product, whether you score 20 points a game or grab 15 rebounds, or are we interested in building young men and young women to be successful people?
That's good. That's a good point.
Are we winning games, or are we in it for the long haul of your life? Because I work with tons of student athletes at the college I work at, right? And I love sports. Don't get me wrong. If I could do it again, I would try to be a professional athlete. I would, love to live that dream. I didn't, and I don't. But now, it's almost like a ministry. We in the position to win lives and produce the next generation of leadership. I look at myself kind of and I work in Silicon Valley, I'm like an angel investor. I don't have, or one of these venture capitalists. I don't have the money, but I'm investing in these young people's lives that they'll go off and be the next big thing, right? So are we in it for the wins and losses as a coach, as a mentor? I think that, okay, well, Stewart went on to play in the NBA. I'm going to ride your coattails all the way up. Or am I in it to invest in you as a person and see your person develop? So once we're in these positions of leadership, what are we in it for?
Right.
You know, I want an education because, I like to teach and I want to teach, but I'm also looking at particularly these students of color. Man, how can we get you, and how can we invest in your life the same way somebody invested in mine?
Right.
You know, how can we show you a path where you can be successful, a self-sufficient, and a critical thinker, an intelligent young man, young woman, whatever the case may be, as opposed to I'm just here for a check, or I'm just in it for the notoriety on the write-ups or the awards or accolades, or whatever. I think you have to also find why people are in the position they're in. For what reasons.
Right.
So. Unfortunately, with that coach, it seemed like that coach might have been in just for the wins and the losses. I can't say for sure.
Yeah.
But that would have been, like you said, an opportune time to really pull you to the side,
Right.
Man, a young man, and say, "Hey, what's going on with you internally, emotionally, mentally?"
Right.
So,
because at that time, I didn't see my uncle that much. So I said,
and you're going through that family transition.
It was major. And now that I go back and examine my life, I really see how much that really impacted my life. I didn't know at that time how it really impacted my life. Even though my father was there and he wasn't really present, but at least he was there to the point that I didn't see him anymore, and how it impacted my mother's life. And I'm closer to my mother, so how that impacted my life. And so, I often look at young people and I look at their behavior, and then I try to figure out, now, where's that coming from? Because I didn't get that. Or, have a conversation. I'll give you a real quick story. One day I remember they asked me to help basketball players at Ohlone College. And that's where Man to Man actually birthed out of. We started with these basketball players at Ohlone College. And they were from New Jersey, they were from New York, they were from Africa, they were all over the world. Really, man, a community college. It's not a
international.
Cool. And I didn't know that. And so I began to have a conversation with them, and it was behind closed doors, which let me know that this was my gift, because as we begin to dive into this conversation, it wasn't about fatherhood, it was just about where they are, and manhood. And man, these guys, man, started crying and comforting one another and wrapping their arms. Oh man, it's okay. Nobody was laughing at anybody. And the conversation began to really excel in a way that their lives was being changed, because they were being able to be delivered, because they exposed their hurt and their pain.
And so many of us are hurting, and so many of us carry pain and trauma from what happened at 9, 10, 15, 16. And if you don't get that out, or you don't express that, if you're 30, 40, 50, it's still with you. And trauma gets passed down. You start putting trauma on your kids and whomever else. So one thing too that I would like to say in regards to that, particularly at Ohlone, man, you got all these young brothers from everywhere playing basketball, and we share that common bond of sports, right? But one thing that we don't oftentimes get a chance to do, particularly as men of color and black men especially, is share and tell our story and tell what's going on. I think that's why these works have had so much impact, is because it's 12, 13, 14 men sharing their particular journey, their particular story, or stories, a couple women too, but it's like, how often you get a chance to, as black men, to emote and share your emotions and be vulnerable and talk about what happened to you at 11 or 12 or 29 and express that. And, we don't often get that opportunity. And then as black men, unfortunately, it's like it's taboo for us to share. It's taboo for us to share your emotions. The only emotion you can show is like rough, tough, rugged, or lust, or anger. You know what I mean? Like, those three, right? We can't sit here and talk and have this conversation openly without no, I can't be vulnerable with you, and you can't be vulnerable with me, or share. A lot of times it's a mask that we have to wear.
Right.
So you were able to kind of crack that mask and get behind the curtain, behind the veil. And with these works, I think that's what it's also been able to share and to show us that, man, we have emotions, we have deep hurt, trauma, we share some trials and tribulations, but we also share some good things. Some testimonies, some triumphs that we've overcome these hurdles and things. And for Black men, man, we have, as you know, we just have so many other things that are put in, so many other hurdles that are put in front of our path to jump over and jump around and things like that. It's just, you can't even go to Starbucks.
Right.
You can't barbecue at the lake.
Right.
You can't be a Black man in America without facing something extra. Extra.
Yeah. Man, this is good. And we're going to take a break. But before we take the break, I really want to dive into that conversation with you just talking about, because for one, transparency is very important. And the problem that young people don't like to talk about their hurt and their pain is because they figured that transparency is a sign of weakness. It exposes them, so it makes them vulnerable. But what I hear from you is something that I really want to go into. I want to talk about your work. I want to talk about in this next segment about how we are ostracized as a Black men in today's society, and all the opposition and the resistance that we go through just because of the color of our skin, and how that has impacted. Now, this is additional from not having a father, not having a male, going through the hood and going through 4 or 5 different gangs, to go to school,
just to get to the store, or whatever,
and then you before you get to school, you realize, you've seen your mom beaten, or you saw her overdose or shot up or whatever, and then you got to go to school with that, and then you are an hour late, then they expel you because you've been tardy too many times, which now you're kicked out of school, and you can't even go to school. And they say, well, why can't they relate like other children? I want to talk about that.
Absolutely.
So we're gonna take a break, and then we're gonna dive right into your book, your documentary, and talk about some of the work that you're doing and how you're impacting lives. All right. So until the next time, we're gonna take a break, and then we're gonna come back.
Okay.